Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos. Welcome to another video in my quick looks at 9.1 series. I've made a bunch of these already about the new systems and stuff coming in 9.1, and I will make a couple more, releasing these kind of rapid fire over this weekend. This video is going to be about the items in the new raid. It's mostly going to be the trinkets because I think that's the most interesting stuff. Although there's some cool stuff from Sylvanas, especially for hunters when we get there. So without further ado, let's get going. This is from Wowhead. I'll have a link to this page in the description below, and we'll just go boss by boss. Every trinket basically looks like this right now, where it has this kind of what looks like normally the flavor text is where they actually put the effects in PTR often. So first one here is an item from the Terragru, the Tome of Monstrous Constructions. This is an int trinket that says, study the tome to increase your damage done to the targeted enemy. Studying an enemy removes the benefit of prior studies. And so, yeah, it's an on-use that gains damage against your chosen target as well, potentially, is what it looks like. So this is going to be a single target intellect trinket, depending on balancing. Might be an interesting one. Not a particularly cool ability, though. Nothing to spend too much time on. Let's move on to Eye the Jailer items. We have the Titanic Ocular Gland. This is a Agi or Strength or Intellect trinket that says, while you are worthy, gain a stat. Worthy is an interesting word here. I wonder, this is potentially some kind of like, we've seen trinkets like this before where they give you like a little side quest to do. There's been, pick up these orbs that fall on the ground and you can get a buff. Maybe being worthy is related to your health or the enemy's health or being in combat for a certain amount of time or something. This is from the Eye of the Jailer as well. So, there's Odin trading his eye as part of the lore here, and Odin worthiness back in Legion. I don't really remember what you had to do to be worthy in Odin's eye, but maybe some lore masters can figure out a way that might work. But regardless, this is definitely an interesting one. The fact that it works for all different stat types means that if this is well tuned, this could be a very chase trinket. Next boss here, the 9. We have the Scrawled Word of Recall. This is an int trinket that says, reset or lower the cooldown of a spell you already cast based on your spec. So once you have a certain spell on cooldown, and this will be a spell that's determined by this trinket and set per spec, you can lower the cooldown. Whether or not this trinket's good is going to be hugely based on how much it lowers the cooldown and which ability it picks for which specs, but this is absolutely the kind of trinket that is often very good for some specs. If this is reducing major cooldowns, stuff like Combustion or CA or whatever for Moonkins, like any of that kind of stuff, this will be very powerful. Or if it's reducing short cooldown stuff, if this is giving you Fire Blast charges, for instance, like the Mechagon Bracers did for Fire Mage, that could be really good. So it'll really just depend on which spells this targets. And yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, my guess is there will be at least some specs for whom this is a powerful trinket. Potentially healers as well, of course, it's a trinket. Next one is Shard of Anhild's Aegis, which is Agi or Strength, and this is a tank trinket, which lets you use it to shield yourself from damage in front of you for 10 seconds. This could potentially be a strong trinket for tanks. Tanks are looking very likely to, at least in Raid, be starting off with the Other Side trinket as basically a mandatory one, given its current tuning. So the question is going to be, what is that second trinket that tanks will use? And this may be one that sort of fits the bar, but a problem with it is that another on-use trinket with the Other Side trinket, a little bit of anti-synergy there because they'll put each other on cooldown. On the other hand, for tanks, double on use, you rarely need to use them both at the same time, and it's kind of nice to stagger them often. So it will depend on how exactly this is implemented, whether this is a flat amount of damage that gets prevented from damage coming in front of you, or whether it's a damage reduction effect against damage coming in front of you. If it's a damage reduction effect, that will, of course, scale much better into high-level content than if it's a flat amount of damage that it prevents. But if it's a large enough flat amount of damage like the Other Side trinket, that will be good too. It's important to remember as well for tanks that the trinkets are going to have to compete with the Cheat Death trinket from Kel'Thuzad, from Sun King's Salvation. There's a good chance that thing will be good for progression, except there is a new Cheat Death trinket in this raid as well that we will get to in a bit. So let's move on to the Remnant of Ner'zhul. Here we have the Whispering Shard of Power, which says, Ner'zhul's whispers will compel you to make decisions for power. They might hurt you, but there must always be a number go up. It's a reference to there must always be a Lich King, of course, Ner'zhul. Lore-wise, I don't know. I'm not a super lore expert. Pretty sure he is involved with the Lich King stuff. And Ner'zhul's Whispers, there was this Whispers of Power effect on like Gul'dan, where it was like haste increase and then haste decrease later. That was a really good effect. Here it looks more like this will be a proc, and maybe it'll be a proc that like tells you to do some damage to yourself, maybe stand in a zone that will hurt you but give you more damage. We've seen effects like this in the Crucible Storms items. Some of those items had benefits and also drawbacks. Or maybe this will be like, hey, you know, if your next spell is a Chaos Bolt, it will do 50% more damage, but it will also hurt you. Something like that. This effect could be strong. I guess it's a strength trinket, so Chaos Bolt isn't the best comparison for this, nor is the Gul'dan haste trinket. But something like that is a way that you could see it going. This isn't a trinket here, the Shadowed Orb of Torment, and it says, torment yourself with the orb to gain greater insight into the patterns of reality, increasing your haste. So an on-use, haste, stat stick, very likely to be very good for a lot of int users, depending on cooldown and, of course, balancing. But this is one of the ones that just does what it says on the... If it does what it says on the tin, it will be good for several different spellcasters. This will very likely be a chase trinket, because oftentimes they make a lot of cute trinkets, and then they make a trinket that gives you stats, and the trinket that gives you stats is often the best for most specs that don't make particularly good use of the cute thing. Next one here is Soulrender Dormazain, who has the Decanter of Endless Howling, which says it's an add to your strength trinket that says your crits have a chance to increase your primary stat, occurs more often based on missing health. It's not clear here whether this is your health, your missing health, or your targets. My guess would be targets, but your targets. But on the other hand, Decanter of Endless Howling, maybe it's flavored around your own suffering or Garrosh's suffering in this case. I think is the lore behind this fight. So maybe that will trigger based on your own missing health, in which case maybe some sort of tank damage trinket here. This will be largely just numbers dependent. This kind of effect, primary stat is valuable this expansion. It could be pretty powerful, especially some covenants get a lot of crit from different soulbind trees, which those are being changed as well. There will be a video coming out soon about those too. Let's move on to Painsmith Raznal, who has the Tormented Rack Fragment that says it's an add to your strength trinket that says your attacks have a chance to deal shadow damage over time to your target. If a target dies while affected, its soul shreds, which you can pick up for crit. These trinkets are generally not tuned to be particularly competitive. They're generally tuned to only be good if you can pick up a kind of unreasonable amount of resets or soul fragments or whatever. And so my guess is this one will be like that as well, but sometimes these actually do end up being pretty good, and some specs that will like this one more than others as well, depending on how much they can make use of it. But my guess is this is likely to be one of the ones that's more likely to be tuned badly, because they're just historically they do with that kind of effect. Ebon Soul Vice here, intellect trinket that deals shadow damage over time to your target, and it's a longer dot with the target's missing health. This could potentially be really strong for raid. If this thing is tuned around being good at all times, but it's doing like triple damage when a target's below 20% health, this could potentially be really good for fights where there is, missing health, or where there is a burn phase that matters when the target's low on health, which more often than not, damage is more important when bosses are low on health. That's more often than not where the DPS checks are. So potentially this could be really strong. On the other hand, int trinkets that just do damage rather than giving you kind of stat effects usually aren't as good than the ones that give stats. So yeah, I'm pulled in a couple different directions on this one. I guess my guess would probably be that this ends up being not a particularly popular one. Guardian of the first ones. Okay, we've got the Salvaged Fusion Amplifier. On use, add your strength trinket that empowers your weapons with the Fusion Amplifier, causing your attacks to deal additional arcane damage and look freaking sweet for 20 seconds. This one, the last thing that looked sort of like this was the Midas Talisman from Ataldazar. That one was tuned really low. This one, on the other hand, has some promising signs for it. The Midas Talisman only affected 5 attacks. This will affect all of your attacks for 20 seconds, so it will scale up with haste, attack speed, amps, that kind of stuff. Could be potentially really strong for people that have a lot of damage coming from their auto attacks, people that make a lot of auto attacks. which is a lot of specs this expansion. So potentially a very powerful trinket there for those sorts of specs. Reactive Defense Matrix says, this is an Azure Strength trinket that says, taking damage has a chance to trigger damage reflection shields, and you'll always gain one when your health drops below 20%. So damage reflection shields, does that mean that you gain an absorb, and for each point of the absorb that gets broken through, the target takes that damage instead, the person hitting you? If that's the case, depending on the tuning, this could be a pretty potent tank trinket option if it procs enough. And the fact that it will always trigger when you drop below 20% health is pretty strong. I mean, as a tank, those most important points of health are the ones where you're dropping low, assuming you don't get one shot from above them to below. So stuff like consider effects like Will of the Necropolis for Blood Death Knight, where below 30% health, you take 30% less damage. Very potent effect at increasing your effective health here. So for tanks, especially for tanks that hang out at low health, like Brewmaster often does sometimes, this can be a really potent mechanical trinket there. Again, though, you're competing with really good tank trinket options right now with the Other Side trinket that you'll presumably be able to get and potentially upgrade with Valor to be, 246 or whatever the 213 equivalent, 220 equivalent is next expansion. So this may not be able to earn a place in there, but I could absolutely see it being a pretty good one. Somewhat reminiscent maybe of the Refracting Diamond Prism from Opulence, which is a very good trinket that just kind of passively mitigated a lot of damage. Fatescribe Roh-Kalo here has the Carved Ivory Keepsake. It's an int trinket that says you have a chance to foresee damage taken by your allies, healing them instantly when they take damage. Obviously, this is just going to be based on the tuning on it, but I will say that effects like this tend to not be as good as they look, but they tend to not be worth as much as the HPS that they will say on your healing overall, because it's not guaranteed that the healing they would do will be particularly useful or that they'll save people when important damage is coming out. But if this is providing enough throughput, obviously it will be a strong consideration. Here is the new trinket that is a cheat death one for tanks, and it will heavily depend on exactly how it works. The Weave of Warped Fates. This is an Azure Strength trinket that says, if you barely died, you can use this trinket within 3 seconds of death to unwind your fate, returning yourself to life. Depending on how this works, this could be a very good cheat death trinket. Compared to the Sun King trinket, the Sun King trinket has the drawback of damaging your allies that are standing near you, which is a pretty big drawback when it does trigger. But it has the upside of absorbing, on the Mythic version, 40,000 damage and healing you for 30,000, so effectively giving you 70,000 health of effective health against one-shots, or against getting killed. The Weave of Warped Fates, a lot is going to depend on what barely died means. If barely died means you can only use it when you've taken 10,000 overkill or less, that'll probably be a lot worse than a Mythic Sun King trinket, which has much more, effective health that it's granting you. If, on the other hand, barely died just means, it can't be overkilled by your whole health bar, which a lot of cheat death effects will be like, okay, if you got overkilled by your whole health bar, I'm out of here, you're not getting any help, then it will be pretty good. Or maybe the barely died effect will be the thing that scales with item level, right? So in that case, again, it could be good or bad, whether it's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 from normal heroic mythic, or 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, or 40,000, 60,000, 80,000, right? Those, depending on where the tuning exactly lands on that, it could beat out or not beat out the Sun King trinket. But again, remember that the Sun King trinket, let's see, Heart of Alar, was it Splintered Heart? Splintered Heart of Alar, there it is. This thing, absorbs the Mythic version. It's providing 75,000 effective health. I mean, that is a huge amount of effective health. So there's a good chance that they won't tune this to be, depending on how much they interpret the barely died clause, there's a good chance this will be worse. But on the other hand, the downside of hurting your allies is, I think, lower than the downside of actually dying for a couple seconds. People look at this and they're like, oh, you have to actually die. It's really not that big a deal on most raid fights if the tank dies and doesn't cost a battle res and comes right back up. The other tank's going to get threat for a sec. But as long as the boss doesn't immediately cast the Tank Buster ability and refresh the stacks on that guy, it should be fine, and you should be able to just res, taunt again, and, you're fine. So my guess is that this is a lower drawback than the Sun King one, and it'll just be a question of whether it is comparably powerful in terms of just how much damage it will absorb for you and how much health it will revive you at. Okay, let's go on to Kel'Thuzad. So Kel'Thuzad and Sylvanas both drop 7 item levels higher. Yeah, 7 item levels higher than the other bosses, just like the Castle Nathria last 2 bosses did. Kel'Thuzad, so that's a big thing. That means that comparable power level trinkets will be better from these bosses if you can get them on the same difficulty. It also means that getting heroic versions of good trinkets from these bosses will be competitive with the mythic versions of the other bosses if they are slightly better. So let's take a look here. We've got the Relic of the Frozen Wastes. This is an Agi trinket that says your attacks have a chance to deal frost damage, mark your target, and then those marks stack up. And then you can summon an Erubian to attack your target, dealing damage based on stacks as the on use here, and your equip cannot trigger while this is on cooldown. To me, this is kind of reminiscent of the Ink Pod trinket from Orgazoa back in Eternal Palace. Unlike that one, which always triggered at 30% and just did all the damage based on all the damage you did up to then, this one has some control on it. And it's possible you'll use it multiple times over the fight, depending on how much the stacks can cap up to. But this is likely to be a very powerful effect that does better than the sims suggest and than the numbers suggest, because you're effectively banking damage in the unimportant parts of the fight that you then get to deal during the execute phase. So that is always something that's really valuable and really underrated when it comes to trinkets. So I think this one is likely to be one that bats above its sims. The Resonant Silver Bell here is an int trinket that says you are accompanied by a spectral familiar. When you heal a target below X% health, the familiar will rush to them and heal them for Y. Cannot occur more often than once per 30 seconds. These kind of effects, again, they're sometimes okay, but they tend to not be as good as stat stuff for healers unless they are really well tuned. It will depend hugely on what that X% is. The fact that this can't occur more often than once per 30 seconds, it means it actually kind of makes it so there's not really any good amount for X here. You know, if X is as low as like 20% or 10%, then you may just have this thing not trigger for long amounts of time and not be getting value out of it, and potentially not save somebody through getting one shot. But if you move X up to a higher threshold, then there's just a very good chance that this will trigger, on cooldown and not help you actually save somebody. So it will only be valuable for the throughput it's providing. But I'm not a healer scientist. My guess, though, is that this will be a trinket that people use because of the item level and the throughput numbers on it, rather than the effect actually being compelling, like the Relic of the Frozen Waste was. And then we also have the Forbidden Necromantic Tome here. It's a int trinket that says, passively increases your damage. Also, when you die, become a semi-lich for 20 seconds. No idea how this works. It might be somewhat similar, though, to the Bonesmith Hermir trait, where after you die, you get to fight for 10 seconds at reduced damage and healing done. Or maybe it'll be a vehicle that you can pilot for 20 seconds when you die. In general, an effect that just is passively increasing your damage at a high item level trinket, there's a good chance this will just be tuned highly enough that you'll use it. Like, the Stone Legion General's trinket, it's just a trinket that gives you, it's a stat stick, and you wear it because it's high item level and it's a good stat stick. And this might be pretty similar if it's giving you a similar damage increase passively, or they might change this to end up being a stat as well instead of a damage increase. But yeah, depending on what the Semi-Lich does, it's most likely it'll end up just being a small bonus. It's possible that there will be some cheese built around intentionally turning into a Semi-Lich, but my guess is that will not materialize, or if it does, they screwed up on the balancing. And finally, we have Sylvanas Windrunner. Sylvanas Windrunner has not just trinkets, but special bows as well. I actually didn't check to see if there's special stuff from these other things as well that are uniquely powerful, so yeah, okay, good. It looks like it's just the trinkets on most of the other bosses, although I haven't looked all the way through. There might be some more on-use effects on the other bosses, or cool stuff on other stuff. But the thing I do know for sure is that there's a cool bow from Sylvanas. So this is a raid bow from Sylvanas. It is, of course, going to be very high itemable, so already pretty good. And it replaces your kill shot with Wailing Arrow, which deals damage to your target and additional damage to all nearby targets within 8 yards of your targets. And lesser creatures stuck by it are stunned for 6 seconds. I don't know what lesser creatures means here. Maybe that's just like minions and stuff even lower than like normal mobs, right? There's that kind of tier of, Spiteful Shades, summoned pets, those kind of lower health mobs that can sometimes, totems, pets. Or maybe it's just all non-elite mobs, in which case could be kind of cool. 6-second stun is a very long time, although this will quickly go on stun DR. This is a compelling thing to consider for hunters as well, potentially increasing the power of the Venthyr Covenant, which has a ability that interacts with Killshot, and so interaction with Wailing Arrow, which is better Killshot, may also, be stonks for that Covenant for them. Also just going to be a tier where everybody wants to play Hunter because there's cool Hunter stuff from this boss, which there's also this quiver. And it's not actually a quiver, it's a back item. It doesn't say that it's only for Hunters, but there's a good chance they will make it only for Hunters. And it says, every 5 shots trigger Withering Fire, striking up to 5 enemies in front of you for 195 shatter damage. And the thing about this cloak is that it doesn't seem like the stats are reduced by virtue of having this equipped. So this is just free value, free, and that's always good. This will be a best in slot item for hunters, almost certainly. There's also this trinket here, the Old Warrior's Soul, which is based, I guess, on Saurfang, who Sylvanas kind of was pretty mean to, actually, if you think about it. And it says, equip Gain Undying Rage and Endless Duty. Undying Rage says while you're in combat, your rage builds, increasing your haste by X% every 10 seconds. And Endless Duty says when a nearby ally's health drops below 50%, sacrifice your own health to heal them. This is a trinket that I think looks pretty compelling for strength-based tanks. Probably not worth it for DPS players, unless it increases your haste by enough to be sweet. The fact that these abilities both have the word, they have the word Undying and Undying Rage, maybe this will just ramp up indefinitely. So if you're in combat for 9 minutes, by the end, this thing might be ramped to an insane level. In which case, that will be really good for, a DPS warrior during the execute phase. Would love to have 3 times a normal trinket stat budget of haste if this is ramped up to that level. So potentially look out for that being good. But otherwise, depending on how it works, it could just be something that's just a nice trinket with a cool little effect there as well. Okay, that's the raid. That's the raid. A quick look at the raid trinkets and the Sylvanas items. Hope you like this sort of video. I haven't made ones like this before, and whether I make one for next patch will be hugely dependent on how the comment section is here, whether you guys thought this was useful, how many likes and stuff it gets and views. So if you did like it, make those numbers go brr, and I'll make another one next patch. Stay tuned as well for more talk about all the other 9.1 stuff. Go watch my other videos over the last couple days about some of the other systems too, if you want to. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.